This conference will now be recorded.
All right. Okay. Thanks everyone for joining. What I'll try to do is I try to set up quickly a page as well on the Confluence resources that we have titled as demo script. So it's on lines of what Saurav had already started. I'll draft it further as we go along, but I thought maybe whatever I use today, I just place it here so that you also have access and can maybe use these resources and kind of for future demos try to follow a similar process of doing so. What I'll try to do is we're trying to use this Android emulator as well so that we can show the app. I hope it all works in the same way. We'll try to show you the apps from here. I'll log in directly into the demo so you have all the same accesses and all the other login credentials, etc. that I use. I've placed it here on this page, and like I said, as I go along, I'll also build it up later, this particular page, so that there's more text in explaining how you can enter different entries, etc. So what I'll try to do is, I mean, 1 hour is really squeezed to explain all the things which are there. I'll try my best, but I'll try to build a bit with, I guess most of you have also had the webinar which Saurav did. So I'll try to maybe emphasize on some things which were slightly different, like the enrollment process, for example, the new apps. I think that was what Saurav mentioned was the apps from Nepal. Maybe I'll focus a bit more in the product part, which I thought was, I mean, it's a bit more complicated, but it's building up on all the registers which he mentioned. And then just explain from an insurance perspective. So just simple flows. How does an enrollment happen, a renewal, etc. So some bits I've added also here, and I would encourage you to also open it up in parallel if you like, this page called the demo script. I mean, you would have seen this part here. So we start with firstly an overall flow of data happening in the whole processing. So you of course have the system which is based on a central server. You have people who've got then accounts and they can log in from their computers according to their role, location, they get access to the system. And then you also have the so-called offline parts. And the offline parts are mainly to support the processing. They don't duplicate the online system. So for example, for enrollment, it's only to allow entries to happen in the system, but the logic of activating policies, etc., all of this is still to be done online. It's just so that if there is no internet connectivity, the office doesn't slow down. If you've got 50 odd forms, they can at least enter into the system, then take an extract, and when the internet is there, upload it to the online. Mobile phone, this little diagram below that, mobile phone is also supporting some of the functions. So you've got mobile phones on the side of the enrollment. So the insurance agent, which is going and enrolling people, they have the apps for undertaking some core functions like enrollment, renewal, feedback, and then the same apps. And I'll try to explain a bit these procedures, what they are. And then on the health facility side, they also have a phone. That's basically to identify a client when they come in, and then for submission of claims. And they can also, of course, directly do it in the system if they have access. For example, I think in Nepal, they have computers, so they directly log into the system and enter claims and verify clients. So with regard to this building the scheme, I think Saurav also explained. So I will just quickly switch here to the actual application, and this is basically building up a scheme. So you have firstly, of course, geography, so locations which are configured, and then you're building on to these step by step, which is maybe I go back here. That's a bit simpler. So locations, you're indicating geographically what villages are there, under what wards do they fall. So there's 4 different levels which can be configured. So you're indicating the locations, because then depending on the locations, you will have users who might be allocated certain locations. You have payers then, which is like third-party payers. So by default, all payments are, the system assumes that the family who enrolls is also making the payment, but there is also this payers that it can be a third party payer who pays for a particular family. So this is just a list for that. Claim administrators, enrollment officers, they've been given, they are of course users, but they've been given a special categorization over here because I mean, this is also a bit from the legacy system that these people had special roles, which at the beginning did not require access in the system, but they would send some data. So claim administrator would send claims, enrollment officers would send enrollment information. I mean, in the beginning was just pictures. So now it's also enrollment data. So this is why they were created separately, but now of course they need user access, because now as more and more functionality is added to the apps, they also require login and these kind of details. Items and services. So the way this is done is in the system, we essentially have kind of a master list of all kinds of services or all kinds of items that can be offered in a particular area. So this is right now not connected to a particular facility or so, but just a very general list which is created with everything. Then out of that, you create lists at the level of different facilities, because different facilities, for example, a primary level facility might offer less than what maybe a secondary level hospital or so would offer. So that way, once you have a master list of services and items, you can create different categories and create different lists, either for a type of facility. So you could have one type for all, let's say, Catholic facilities, or one for all government facilities, or say split it by private, public, or primary level, secondary level, whatever. So these categorizations can be done, and that's where you also create the price lists. So each of the services and items that you're creating, you allocate a standard price to it. But at the same time, you can create specific price lists, which then depend according to health facilities. So what do they actually offer at what prices? But this again is, I mean, can be kind of altered at the level of a product, because when the insurer then negotiates with the health facility, it's possible that they create another price list. So there is a set of services which the facility provides, but maybe the insurance says, okay, we will not cover all. Maybe they will exclude some, or maybe they have special prices, which are then altered. Health facilities as well. So this is, I think sort of covered this. I won't go too much into this, but rather more on the product side. But this is essentially indicating what health facility is created in what location. And the important parts are then linking up these price lists and what coverage areas they have here. And then one of the more complicated bits really here, which then links across to the enrollment bits, claims, etc., is more around the product configuration that's there. So this, for example, is one of the products, the standard products, which is going to be there on the demo server. The details here are, I mean, quite a lot of things. So for example, at the beginning, there's a lot of identifiers. So around the product, codes, names, validity is quite important. So you might have the product coming to an end at a particular point in time, and then you can indicate this conversion. So at the end of 2030, when this stops, when this product ceases to exist in the market, it can then be transferred to this particular product after that date. So any person who's then renewed on a policy which was belonging within this time frame, they will then get switched to a different product here. The same, a lot of these details now relate to the premium. So this is now related to the enrollment part. So when a family gets in to the system, how do you decide what premium they have to pay? So there's something called lump sum. So that's something which is per family. You can also have contribution set as individual. So each person joining has a particular premium. They can also be split according to child, adult. You can have limitations on the number of families. You can also indicate that, okay, above, so in this case, for example, up to 6 will be charged 10,000. And if it goes above, you can also then configure here saying each individual coming above 6 will then have an additional of whatever, 1,000, 2,000, whatever configuration is there. Then there are some bits around related to, again, policy, the duration of the insurance period. So the policy, when someone enrolls, is it a month, 6 months, 12 months? Administration period, these are some delays which are added to the enrollment. Installments, so in certain cases, like in Cameroon, they said we want to have a limit on the number of installments you can make, so they can also configure that here. There's grace periods which are then allowed. So this relates more to fixed cycle start dates. So Nepal also, for example, has certain dates on when the insurance policy starts. But then we were told there needs to be more flexibility if someone comes slightly later. So if the cycle starts 1st of June, someone comes on 5th or the 7th or 10th, there needs to be some flexibility. So that's where the grace period has been added here. There were these discounts, which again, I think, for example, Nepal had. So if you renew within time, you get a discount, or if you have fixed enrollment cycles, for example, starting June, but then already you come in January, you are well in advance, you can also have discounts over there. So a lot of these are to do with the enrollment side of things. The other side is then the health facility contracts which you have. So what are you going to pay to different health facilities? And that's what are configured here in terms of the services and the items. So that's the full list which you get, and you can then decide as part of this product what is actually covered. And there are also quite a lot of combinations here which you can do. So for example, you can add waiting period specifically. So for example, if it's a delivery, maybe there is a waiting period in the insurance scheme, you can indicate that here. You can indicate how the limits have to be taken care of. Do they come from a fixed price list, which is already configured in the system? Or is it a health facility, which is in each claim indicating what money they are going to request as reimbursement, and then the insurance, of course, decides on their side whether that's acceptable or not. So there are all these combinations. Limits can also be treated differently, whether it's depending on the kind of case it is. So is it an emergency case, a referral, or a regular visit? You can have different conditions. So emergency, for example, you can have maybe no co-payments there, but if it's a regular visit, maybe the rule of the scheme is to say there will be a co-payment. There can also be conditions which can be applied separately, again, to adult children. Like I said, there were waiting periods. And then if there are specific ceilings at the level of a service or an item which needs to be defined. So for example, you say consultations cannot go above this amount. So these combinations are similar to the configurations that can also be done at the level of items here. So services and items, you can also have different combinations. So if you have DRGs or whatever, one could just have a list of these codes listed down over here, and perhaps you don't get into specific items and pricing them and reimbursing. So it really depends on the kind of reimbursement system which you have in place. There are some other fees here which were, I guess, more in Cameroon that they were using kind of fixed fees. So these are not related to the number of people who are enrolling, but more on the administrative side, some kind of lump sums or so which they wanted to add. Scrolling further down, a lot of this is then to do again with the way different conditions are applied on the offered product. So you can have, for example, at the level of each treatment, at the level of an individual or a household, certain conditions that you place. You can say there are deductibles, or there is an upper ceiling that anything above, then the client has to pay themselves. This can be split by hospital, non-hospital care. In Cameroon, they also had this additional categorization, which was around consultations, surgeries, deliveries, hospitalizations, antenatal visits, etc. And then the bottom part are more to do with some form of capitation system. So the one which I flagged in the red color here, one part of it is to do with what's called relative pricing. So you essentially say, we take a period of time, we take the total amount collected within that. So that's the upper limit of what we are willing to pay out. And you can indicate within that. So in this case, for example, you could say, okay, 60% of that amount collected every month is allocated for paying claims. And you can then indicate, in this case, it was primary level facilities, and you can then indicate the way that they are to be distributed then. So that's the total amount. And then depending on which facility provides more care, they get the higher share of the money out of that. That was one capitation system which was allowed in Tanzania. And now what they're applying is another one where they put weightage to different, they call it, parameters, where they give different weightage. So the part of the money which is collected, which is allocated for paying claims, and then they are calculating based on the total population in that area which is covered by the health facility. They are given certain weightage. You then give certain weightage to how many people actually insured in that area, and then also give a weightage to the number of visits that these insured people make to the health facility. So you can then indicate that, okay, my weightage, I mean, for example, if it's not that complicated, you only give weightage to um, the number of insured people who are seeking care at the health facility, then it could just be 100% on the side of insured people visiting care. But that's basically here, and then it's split also up as weightage can be done based on population, so individuals, or based on families. So this is one part I thought I spend a bit more time on explaining the actual product, because this is a bit more complicated and links quite a lot to different modules. And I'll maybe then just switch now. This is on the configuration side. So with this, you kind of have the scheme set up. You've got the different bits set up. The health facilities are there. You've got the different price lists, etc. What kind of arrangements are done with the insurer, then what prices, what co-payments, etc. What is offered to the client, so what do they have to pay, discounts, all of this configuration is done. And that's basically the starting point when the insurance then starts to operate and undertake transactions. So this again, it's I thought it's also just to visualize a bit, not just the system, there's also a process which happens and the system is supporting that. So this is an example of how an enrollment, for example, takes place. There is an enrollment officer who basically goes to the village, collects money, takes a picture of the person, and captures some data from the family. I'll try to show you now the app and how this basically gets done. And essentially the cards are given to the individual on the spot. So you're not waiting for any approval to happen from the system or so. The card is issued. Tanzania, for example, they always indicate on the card one additional month as the starting date. So they assume that it'll take 1 month to process all of this. And in their case, they were actually moving forms back and forth. And that's what we're trying to remove now with the new application. But the idea is the card is issued on the spot, and then the rest of the information, if there's a form, money, etc., it goes up. Or like in Tanzania now, they are trying to use the new application to directly enter the information on the individuals. And then the money also use mobile payment to to make the payment directly, so that the system then automatically can activate the policy. So very quickly, this is basically one of these apps which an enrollment officer has, so on their side. I will try and quickly, you have a different login here, it's fine. That's fine, let me just do it here. So this is now enrolling a new family, and it's very similar. I mean, the interface looks a bit different, but the fields are exactly the same as what you find here. So on the online part, it's structured in a way, when you enter a family, you basically, the first person that you enter is the head of the household. So that's what you enter here. And the different bits then after that are you put more individuals into the family. So that constitutes the whole family. These are all the insurees. You then allocate a policy to that family and then make a contribution against that. And so that's what I will do on the app here. So what you see on the web app, that's basically what you have on the phone application here. So you've got these configurations. This is now based on some configuration of Sorry, this is based on the login of the enrollment officer. So some of these bits, you are allocated a particular location. So all of that is entered. There are lots of fields here, and this is basically a unification of all the country requirements. So meaning this is not the field that they see in all countries. Some fields are relevant in Tanzania, some are in Nepal also. But what you see here on the demo version, this is a unification of all. So I'm just going to put the red ones, the mandatory ones, and try to move forward quickly. Here, basically, the cards which are there, they carry a barcode, and the barcode then has the ID number of the individual. So you could, of course, press this and then scan the barcode on the phone. It's on an emulator, so I'm just going to type the number 77, yeah. Any name, and then add a picture for the person. Here again, I will just add a, since it's an emulator, I can't run the camera here, but let's say we add this, whatever picture is available. So that's basically supposed to be the picture of this individual. And right now, this is the head of the household. Oop. So date of birth, that's quite an old person. I just add a date. Okay, whatever. I need to practice more on the emulator. Okay, I'm just going to put a few years back. So again, just doing the mandatory fields, and you can also play around with it so you get to know these other fields. So that's basically now the household unit has started to be entered. So you can, of course, have more people in the family. So this is the head of the household. So whenever you search for a family here on the online application as well, the family is always identified by the ID of the first person. So that's the ID you will be able to find here. And if it's any individual, then you would find it here in Insuree. So let's add another person for the family. The same. So, I mean, the current address, it's also possible that maybe one member of the family lives at a different address, but is still part of the same unit. So there's a field for an additional address if valid, and otherwise the address of the head of the household is then taken as the address for the whole family. So that's the different individuals now who are part of this family. Like I said, so that's the creating the family unit. All the insurees are there for the family, and then you have policies and contributions. So I'm now adding a policy here, and what you're indicating is on what date did this person come in and enroll into the insurance program. So let's say it was the 1st of this month. And then the system automatically checks which product was actually valid and available in that particular context on that particular day. So we select one. The effective date is then calculated by the system, and then this really depends on the product configuration. So like I mentioned, if it's a fixed product, and let's say anyone who comes now cannot start right now, but only start in June, and that's what the product defines, then in that case, the starting date would have been then. In this particular case, it's a free enrollment. So I said 2nd January is the enrollment date, and that's where the policy then starts, and it's valid for a year, and that's the amount which is then which has to be paid. And by the way, the list here, it comes, the list that you have here. So for example, policies, it's also possible that the family has multiple policies. So that could also be listed here. You could have, for example, a basic coverage, and then you have an advanced coverage or whatever. So that's where these multiple policies would then show. So that's a payment against this particular policy. So like I said, this by default basically means it's the individual, the family paying themselves. This distinction was the contribution and others is basically linked to all the configurations which we did in the product side, and this photo fee, this comes from the unification. So Cameroon has an ad hoc fee which is applied, which is not configured in the product, and hence it's separately configured here. In this case, we just say contribution. So this calculation then comes from what was mentioned in the product. This then receipts, the payments. So what date? I indicate the same, the 1st of Feb, and that this was done in cash. So now we've, as I mentioned, we've completed, we've created the head of the household, some individuals to build the whole family, allocated a policy depending on how many people were there, etc. It calculated the premium. We gave a contribution then to it, and then we now try to send this. Do you have the password for this account? If it asks.
Yes, use your password.
Okay. So these login details are all what I have added on the wiki page. Okay, so once it comes from the phone, it should be then in the system here. So that's basically now the family that we have added. So the two individuals who were added, that's the policy which we just added. So as it says, the 1st of February, the policy started, and start expiry date, policy status now is active. That was the value, and this is the contribution which was paid. So the same what I showed now on the app, you could also directly do it on the system here. So add a family, and then step by step add more people in the family to build the whole family unit, then add a policy against that, and then make a payment against that particular policy. So that's the enrollment process. I'll just copy this individual here. The same way now, if someone comes, the next part is about the utilization. So if a client now is insured in the system, they have an insurance card, they go to a health facility, and there the process is essentially very simple. The receptionist at the facility then has a phone. They scan the card, and if the person is insured, then they're treated as an insured client, if not as a non-insured client. So it's quite a simple process there, and it's just a matter of the inquire looks something like this. Here again, like I said, you would scan the barcode of the card of the individual and get details on that particular person. So for example, there was one I placed here where we had placed a picture. So this was, for example, one of the households which is in the system, and this is also added here, so you can use it as an example. The detail comes on the individual, so date of birth, etc., picture, and that's where the identification of the client is done. And then the details on eligibility are then part of this section here. So in this case, the person is expired. So the health facility would know how to treat that patient then. So this is around health service utilization. So when a client comes to a health facility, um, how are they dealt with in the system? Now the other main part is around claims process. And by the way, also on the online, so on the web application as well, there is this little field on top. So here again, the logic is the same. You would type in the ID number and search. So in case health facilities also have direct access to the system, they have a computer, they could also use this then to check for the individual, the identity, to verify the identity and eligibility. So the claiming process now, this is the other complicated part. And the diagram here is basically just to show how it happens in different ways. So you have, of course, the mobile phone through which claims can be sent to the server. From the health facility side, you have the online client. So if they have a computer, access to the internet, they have an account, the claim administrator would log in directly and submit the claim. You then have the offline part, which I mentioned. So again, here, this is not the processing of the claim, just entering it to make sure it's in the system. And then when internet is there, it could be uploaded on the same, on the server, and then it's processed on the server side. There are also cases where people are just doing this on paper forms. So the health facility still uses simple paper forms and they send it to the insurance office, for example, in Tanzania, in some cases, if they have absolutely no connectivity and for whatever reasons they decide to do this. And then the insurance office, using that particular login which is created, they can then enter the information on the system. The other part here to know is then what happens after that. So this is the different ways in which it's sent to the system. And the next point is, how is it then processed internally within the system? So there are different bits here. On the online part, you'll basically just see health facility claims review batch run. And these are also all split by user roles. So if it's a claim administrator, they can only submit a health facility claim. But for further processing, I'll show it in a minute, you need different roles to then undertake. But in the system, what it does is once the claim gets submitted, the first level is the system will, there is a person on the insurance side who can then take the claim to the next stage saying, okay, all details are entered, this is fine, I move it now for processing. And the first level of check happens in the system, which is all the configurations, I mean, not all, but most of the configurations that you have in, for example, the product side. So if you have said that the price list is supposed to be this, the facilities are supposed to cover, the product is supposed to cover these services, all of these checks are done at the first level. So if, for example, something which is excluded, and that's configured in the system that they should not be paid by the insurance, and that service or item automatically gets rejected. So there's that first level of automatic check, which is there. The next level then is with regard to a medical advisor also, who then manually goes through these claims and makes certain checks. And then after that, once they do it, they can still manually say, okay, maybe this is approved or not for whatever reasons. And then they push it forward. And in that stage, then some other checks are taken, which is at a higher level. So for example, what we mentioned with regard to capitation system, that calculation happens after each claims are then dealt with individually. Then is the step where collectively what happens to these claims, and then that's finally prepared into reports which then are to be used. So here again, I just give a quick example of claim. So this is now a person at, let's say, a health facility claim administrator who's looking at the system. So I had to select all of this because I have an admin account, but if it's this particular individual with their login when they come in, they basically come to that kind of, these configurations are already there and they can't change it. So you essentially start with adding a claim. So that's the first part, who is the individual for whom the claim is to be registered right now. So here again, if the ID number doesn't exist, so like in this case, the insurance number is not found. Let me add the one which I had here. I think this I added yesterday. Yeah, okay. So there is some household which was entered with that number. So there's this individual. Again, you can play around with this to know a bit more details. I'll focus mainly on the mandatory part. So you first have, of course, the diagnosis. So you have configured this also in the system. I just randomly select something here. Claim number is also essential because that's the ID number with which you uniquely identify the claim later on. When is the claim actually happening? And then these dates are important, visit date and from. So let's assume 4th, this person came in. It was an outpatient treatment, but I'm claiming today. So the person came in on the 4th, left on the 4th, an outpatient treatment. And today I'm making a claim. And this again is mandatory because here again, as I mentioned in the product category, there are some conditions which are applied. So you need to indicate, in this case, other means it's a standard case where the person is supposed to come to the first point of care. Let's say there was a standard consultation with oral rehydration solution, which was given, let's say 2 units. Prices were configured beforehand. So the system then calculates here what is the amount that the insurance, the health facility will claim from the insurer. I save this, so and save this claim number. So this interface is basically for a health facility staff who's entering claims. So you might have a batch of, I don't know, 20 odd claims which have to be entered. So the interface is such that you just say add, and the configurations of the health facility code, etc., don't have to be repeated, and you just go on with the claim. So it's the second claim that you then enter, save, add the third one, just to make it faster. But I'll just focus on this one claim which I have entered. So now as a health facility staff, I've entered this claim, and it's basically in this entered state right now. I could also search with the claim number. So this is the claim which was entered. This is now a point before any checks happen to double check and see whether there is any problems with the claim, anything needs to be modified or not. And the person then on the insurance scheme side can then say, okay, this is all fine, and I move it now for processing to the next stage. And that's the stage which I mentioned, the first level where some automatic checks are done. So in this particular case, what I just added, it's a summary. So everything passed here. That's the first level of check, which means it was all covered in the package which was offered. There were no restrictions. So there are certain services, for example, you can configure and say it's only for females. All of these criteria, etc., were all verified, and therefore the claim is now moved to the next stage. Now, this was the first level which I mentioned. The next part is then for the medical advisor. So let's say there is a medical doctor or so who's appointed on the insurance side to further screen these claims now. What they do is they come, so the person who has the login, basically all of this is then deactivated for them. It's only the review part which is then activated for the medical advisor. They log in and they then decide, again, depending if they have specific location, etc., which is allocated, then this would be configured. And if not, they can then decide certain criteria as to what they would like to check. And there's quite a lot of these here. In this case, I will focus just specifically on the one claim that I entered right now. So I go down to all these configurations and search for the claim that I was looking for. So this is the claim right now, which now comes into my lap. So as a medical advisor, I might have maybe 50 claims which come up from this particular health facility at a point. And the question then is, what do I want to check? They can, of course, go one by one through all the claims, or they can make a selection here and say, okay, I only want to look at some of the claims. And they can do this, they can do 2 bits here. So one is the actual review, which they will conduct. And the second is a request for a feedback. So if they select a claim for a feedback, then the enrollment officer who belongs to the village where this individual who was treated will get information on their app saying collect feedback from this family. and they would then have to go and collect feedback. But that's not going to disturb the processing here, but it's just added qualitative information which you're then capturing on certain questions, what happened, etc. So in my case, I will not select anything for feedback, but just show a bit on the review side. So feedback here, for example, then again has different criterias. You can say you randomly select, you can say above a particular value, or you can say variance, so which means if, let's say, on average, if the services are going 10% above the average value of the other claims, then flag these claims to me. So in this case, I want to bypass the feedback part. So I say randomly select 0%. And this again, you can do manually, but if you have like 50, 60, 80 claims, you might want to have some criterias which then help move with this process. So this was not selected. Now for review, let's say I do want to select this. Here again, I just say, I mean, in this case, it's only one claim. So I say randomly select 100% of the claims. And so this claim is now selected here for review, but not for feedback. So as a medical advisor, I have now decided what to do with these claims, and it's possible some claims were left out. So if you, for example, said 50% and there were two claims, one would just say not selected and not selected for review as well as feedback, and that can then be further processed to the next stage. But in this case, let's say they decide to review it. The medical advisor then looks at the claim and says, okay, all of this looks fine, but for some reason, let's say this is over prescription or whatever, I will only approve one oral rehydration salt, whatever. They can also then say they reject it for whatever reasons. If they don't see proper explanation for this or not, they can then add explanations as well. And I didn't mention it, but also at the time of entry of claims, the person can also add justification. So the claim administrator who's entering claims, if there are notes, they can also add as to why this particular treatment was given or so in a text form. And that's what the medical advisor can use in order to make this decision on what is passed or not. So in this case, for example, I approve one of these units. So as you see here, the claimed amount was different and what has been approved is now changed. That's my decision. It's saved right now. And the reason there is you can also then go back to the health facility in case there was some dispute and keep it in the safe state. But in this case, let's say everything is checked. I want to move it to the next stage. So as a medical advisor, I say, okay, this claim is now reviewed. And then as a medical advisor, this is the last step, which is to say, okay, now all the claims I have looked through and they can move to the next stage where the accounts person can then take it forward and then process the final list of payments. So this is now submitted, valuated. So the claim now goes to the state called valuated, which means it's gone through all levels of individual checking, whether automatic or manual, which had to be undertaken. And then the last part is around running a batch. So from admin point of view, the medical advisor, etc., has looked at all the claims, and now you want to make batches of these claims so that you can start payments. So let's say a month is over. One health facility, or let's say all health facility, have said, okay, we've submitted all the claims. The insurance scheme from their perspective have also gone through all the different stages. They have done all the stages of checking and they have moved the claims. Now you want to create final bills to be paid. So here you would essentially select, I mean, in this case, let's say a particular health facility or whatever, but you select time periods where you say, okay, for January, now we have completed all the claims and we can now generate the final invoices, which have to be paid out to the health facilities. So I mean, just looking at the time, maybe I'll quickly try to cover also the renewal and reports, not so much in detail, but basically this is the last step in the claim processing. And if you run this, what it does is it also locks all the claims. So everything you have now told the system that for January, this report is done, and that report is then blocked for that time period. So it's also important to know at this point whether all claims have been dealt with or not. If there's something pending, it then goes into the next time period. And the reason for this locking is also related to then all the capitation payments, etc., which is taking into account what came into the system within the time period for which the capitation payment had to be calculated for. So this is why it's important to lock this. And like I said, anything which is missed out then goes into the next time period. Then just very quickly with regard to the renewal, renewal is also a process now that gets triggered on the server side. So the more, I mean, there's again different ways. There were SMS, etc. Initially, which were being sent to the enrollment officer, but now it's more and more onto the mobile app that you have a list basically which you get. That's okay. For this particular person, probably there is no policy currently to renew, but it's basically sorry about that. I'm using a different login, so I don't have policies which are already showing in the system. But basically, the server is sending out this information to the enrollment officer, and on their phone they get a list like this. It's kind of a to-do list. You've got 15 different households which are expiring in this month, and go and renew them. So the enrollment officer would just select one of these, and then the same interfaces would come out. They mainly have to put the payment details, so that's the main thing which comes out. But it's possible at this point there are some modifications as well to the family. Maybe a new member joined or whatever, but that can also then be done on the mobile phone app. And that's the same logic also which I mentioned for the feedback. So the lists are coming onto the phone, and the person then gets these lists and goes one by one to that particular person, and then takes the feedback from their side. That's basically renewal and the feedback apps. And one last thing which I wanted to explain was then around reports. So there are lots of these reports which are then in the system. Here, so tools, reports, and there are lots of reports which then can be generated out of the system depending on the standard operations which are undertaken. Different filters on it across, depending again on the reports. So the kind of reports, is it monthly, is it within certain dates? But that really depends on different reports which are here. And one last bit was around more the analytical reporting component, so the AR component. We also have all the transactional database on a weekly basis, for example, in Tanzania. That I can say concretely because they use it there. There is all the transactional database is taken across cubes and then sent into a different data warehouse, a different point database, which then has which then links up to different Excel files which we use to directly access these cubes. So it's separated from the transactional database and doesn't disturb that. But then on these on this data warehouse, you can essentially use standard Excel functions like pivot tables, etc., with which some additional reporting can then be done across dimensions. So this is just one example of, for example, looking at claims for a certain period of time, for a certain location, for a certain type of facility or whatever, or product. And in this case, like looking across who's being treated for claims, value, by age, by gender. So some of these dimensions which can then be managed. So this is in addition to the standard reports. I mean, initially these reports have also grown to quite a lot. Again, what you see on the system here is to do with a unification of all the different reports that we have. So it's a much larger list. So all the reports which are in different countries, and then in addition, it's the ARMS component, which is allowing for some additional flexibility in reporting. So that's basically the current system as it is. I'm sorry if there are any questions, or if anyone wants to raise anything right now, and I hope I was able to, within this time, at least run you through the key bits. There's still much more, and I would urge you to please. I mean, it's just a matter of playing with the system and getting more comfortable with different functions, etc. So as we go along, I will further develop the demo script so you have more details of what I was talking about right now. I can also put it in the demo script so you have step by step what to do. But there's also the manual which explains what these different fields are. I mean, it literally goes field by field, reports, everything, it explains it there. So also have a look. Yeah, and if there's any other questions or so, I guess you can unmute yourself and just raise it if there is. I don't see anything.
Hi, Dragos.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's Lawrence Walters here from JMB.
Hi, it's Siddharth here, by the way. It's Dragos is my colleague on the technical team, and it's Siddharth here from the implementation team.
Great. Yeah, no, thanks. No, if no one else has a question, if I can sneak one in quickly before the end of the meeting, that would be great.
Sure.
Yeah, thanks. Thank you very much for that presentation. That was really, very insightful. I have a question on the price lists that are used within the application. You basically have an overview of how the price lists are managed from the front end. I would assume that that you get quite a large variety of different price lists for different products. For medicines, for ethical surgicals, potentially for services, by specialists or otherwise by facilities. In different countries, those price lists could, be managed or regulated differently, and then, subsequently the prices or the, products could be increased, on a yearly basis, or new products might kind of, be released. In terms of managing those kind of lists, is there a kind of a way to kind of manage it in bulk, over time, and to check it? And also, are those kind of changes stored? I mean, I could see from the front end, it seems like it is, but just for the question is really, around the kind of management of this reference data, and then the accessibility for it, for future reporting. So if you can then, in subsequent years, kind of, do analyses based on what the cost for a specific product was, based on that. So that's just the question. Thanks.
Yeah. I mean, I opened, I hope you can see this page, the price lists that you are configuring. Basically, there's something called a valid from date. So the system is also keeping in track when the services items were configured and at what price, because as you said, there are also changes which happen in time. Maybe, today they decide paracetamol is now being priced at a different rate. But then if a claim comes from yesterday or 2 months back, they still need to follow the old price. So the system is keeping track of that. So what you see here, valid from, that's basically the date, keeping track for products, the changes which are happening with products, with services, items, and at the time of claims, then it tries to track the same. And in the database, then also it's the same, that more details are I mean, you can pull out more details from there, but that was the idea, that you can also look at price changes then. So, I mean, ARMS, for example, what I showed in the one slide here, you could then say, okay, I know that in 2018 prices were this, and you can try to look at whatever in 2018, what were the prices for different services or so, for example. But then this year, maybe the prices have changed, and you can try to track that. But it's basically tracked through this valid from date, which goes into the database as well, and it keeps track with the claims as to which dates to follow. I hope I answered your question. Or is there?
Yeah, no, that's great. Thanks. Yeah. No, thanks for that. If there's no one else, I have a follow-up question to that, if possible.
I guess just go ahead, because
okay. Don't see anyone else. Yeah, so just with regards to the actual processing of claims, so what you mentioned for the alternative reimbursements is that there is a facility to actually allow for that. So, with respect to kind of processing at the time of claims assessment, can the system, deal with quite complex situations where different service providers might have different contracts, based, for the same product, that if a claim comes through for one facility versus another, but that facility has a different, payment arrangement, that, that would be taken into account. And then also, is there facility for then taking that into account for not double billing for the individual, kind of items, as opposed to for the kind of, bundled, so for which you would need to obviously ensure that there's no other kind of similar products billed within a certain period of time for that specific arrangement.
I mean, there are some, I mean, of course, the sky is the limit with regard to putting in all kinds of logics to block and to do automatic checking, etc. There are some, I mean, if I directly try to answer a question, for example, at the time of configuring a service and item, you can indicate frequency. So which means you cannot have a particular drug again allocated to you in another claim for 2 months or whatever. So you can put certain buffers over there, and that the system can automatically check on their side. And there's also things here like, is it an outpatient care, inpatient care? The example I gave you, the same thing if you, the 2 services items which I indicated, they were in outpatient setting. So if it's inpatient, it would reject that. So there's some checks and balances here. And I hope the frequency answers directly your question about whether something can be, I mean, the same thing cannot be billed to the insurer within a specific time frame. So if it's within a week or something, the system will know and that it can block. The other part about health facilities, you can configure at the level of health. So that's what I was explaining with the price lists. You create a master list per se of services and item, and then you can create all combinations of price lists. So you can say for a private facility, there are these prices which will be offered, but for the government facility, there are these prices which will be offered. So in that way, when a private facility sends you a bill, they send with a different rate, and that can be approved in the system. And then whereas the government facility maybe sends at a different rate. And you can also have cases where you do not have an agreement on a fixed price list, then you just allow them to submit what they want, and then you have to go through it manually, and then you decide what is given or not.
Great, thanks. Yeah, and then just from your experience in terms of the system, how much of the facility claims are typically kind of kicked out to like a medical advisor, and how much is automated? I mean, if you have any kind of idea of to what extent are claims just basically run through the rules and processed versus actually having to be intervened on? Because I mean, the first part of the question is obviously a certain portion of the claims would be automatically processed and assessed and paid. Not all of them are sent for adjudication. I assume. I'm not sure.
Yeah, I mean, basically, what you have in the system is the health facility claims is you enter everything and you pass it through. So you of course need someone to move it from one stage to the other, and you have to go through all stages. But as you said, of course, claim reviewers are not going through all the claims, and that's why these filters are there. And in some cases, I know, I mean, it depends on where the medical advisor actually goes into detail. So in Tanzania, in some cases, for example, the CHF manager is also a medical doctor who works in the DMO structure, and they might want to go through claims. So they are maybe filtering out a little bit. There are also cases where at this point in the review stage, they basically said bypass everything. So like I did it right now in the example here, all the claims that you get here, you have to take it through this stage. But if you don't have a reviewer or so, someone can just come here and then select and say, okay, I want to bypass the whole thing. So you basically say, for example, the claims that you select for review are, let's say randomly you select 0% of the claims, which automatically moves everything to the next stage. And then someone has to then select and say, okay, I process it now, so it's gone for calculation later. So you have to take it through all the stages. Someone has to manually do it, but yes, people are bypassing it depending on whether there's a claim reviewer or not and what they want to check.
Okay, great. Thanks, Siddharth.
Right. Is there anyone else with a question, or is it, I mean, I don't want to take others' time as well. It's a little past 11 now, the 1 hour mark that we had. We could also close the call then. I don't know, Victoria, Saurav, anything to add, or?
I will only have to add recall that the database, the demo server database is restored every weekend. So if you play around with a demo server, during the weekend you will lose what you added as families and claims, so you have to start over in the beginning of next week.
Yeah, so just keep that in mind. Yes,
exactly.
I'm good over here. Thanks a lot, Siddharth, for the run through. I think it was a good start for everyone to get on board and to really see the application. I'm sure there will be some more detailed questions and also need once people start to dig deeper into the software and also get on board with actually carrying this forward to potential further users or presenting the software at conferences as such. So I think this is just a start to get you all a glimpse into it and really hands-on view on the interfaces. So I wouldn't call it a final, but just a starting shot at it. And yeah, thank you all for your participation. Please feel free also to reach out to all of us individually with your follow-up questions.
Thank you very much, everybody.
If there are no more remarks for anyone, I would suggest to close.
Okay, thanks very much.
Thank you, Victoria. Thank you,
Thank you.
Tragas.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yes, thanks.
Bye-bye.